Welcome to my scientifically informed insider look at mental health topics. If you find this video to be interesting or helpful, please like it and subscribe to my channel. Hello, this is Dr. Grande. Today I have a few different questions about the Cyntoia Brown case. Can I analyze the case? Should she have been released from prison? Can trauma turn somebody into a murderer? And I've had a number of questions around the Netflix special about Cyntoia Brown. It's named Murder to Mercy. What did I think about this special? And was it really a fair representation of what happened? So just a reminder that I'm not diagnosing anybody in this video, only speculating about what could be happening in a situation like this. Now, this is an interesting case, and it's really quite controversial. It focuses attention on the idea that criminal culpability can be reduced by the presence of mental illness or prior trauma. Some people believe that the outcome in this case corrected an injustice and points out areas that should be reformed in the criminal justice system. Others believe that Brown beat the system. She manipulated her way out of prison with the help of a bunch of celebrities who don't know anything about mental health or criminal justice. So I will look at the crime, the investigation, and the trial, then talk about whether there was really justice in this case, including how mental illness and trauma should impact sentencing. So now starting with the crime. So we start at August 6, 2004 in Nashville, Tennessee. A 43-year-old real estate agent named Johnny Allen meets 16-year-old Brown in the parking lot of a restaurant. Allen asks Brown if she's hungry and if she was up for any action. After a brief negotiation, Brown agreed to have sex with Allen for $150. Brown got in Allen's truck and they drove to his house. Later that evening, the two did not have sex, but rather talked for a while. Allen was lying in his bed, asleep, when Brown produced a .40 caliber semi-automatic pistol from her purse and fired one round into the back of Allen's head, killing him instantly. She took two of his firearms, which she had shown her earlier, and $172 out of his wallet. She then stole Allen's white Ford F-150 pickup truck, driving it to a parking lot where she would abandon it. Eventually, Brown made her way back to the hotel room where she met up with a man named Garion McLaughlin, who she had been living with in that location for the past 3 weeks. He was known as a drug dealer and an armed robber who was functioning as Brown's pimp. He went by the street name Cutthroat, or Cut for short. He was murdered in 2005 when he was 25 years old, so just a few months after Brown was arrested. Now moving to Brown's arrest and the trial. The police found Allen's body on August 7 after Brown made a 911 call using the victim's phone. On that call, she simply supplied the address followed by the word homicide. She later indicated that she hated the thought of the victim lying in his bed, undiscovered. The police caught up with Brown in that hotel room I mentioned. They found cash, the guns, the victim's cell phone, and they found a Ford key that matched the victim's Ford F-150. The police interrogated Brown. She indicated that Allen began acting suspiciously, making her uncomfortable, and eventually she believed that he was reaching under his side of the bed for a rifle, so she shot him in self-defense. She admitted she never saw a weapon in his hand. She also denied that she was a prostitute, saying that she was just sleeping in different people's houses. Brown was charged with murder and a number of other offenses. The prosecution of Brown is fairly straightforward. No gun was found under the bed. The victim's fingers were partially interlocked, making it seem like, of course, he wasn't reaching for any type of weapon. In a recording made by the jail, we see that Brown admitted to her mother that she executed Allen. Shortly after her arrest, Brown attacked a nurse in a mental health facility. During that attack, Brown admitted that she shot Allen in the back of the head and threatened to shoot the nurse. Brown had also written a note in jail in which she indicated she was lying about believing that Allen was retrieving a firearm, and she was lying about being nervous. The victim's character was called into question during the trial. Allen had allegedly sexually assaulted a woman sometime before his murder. The prosecution admitted that Allen picked up Brown for the purposes of sex. A mental health professional testified that Brown had a serious substance use problem from the age of 13 and borderline personality disorder, which would explain her anger and unstable relationships, and how she could go from loving somebody to hating them. So I think what was being suggested here was that these traits could explain why Brown murdered Allen. But the love-hate cycle with borderline personality disorder wouldn't be activated that quickly. She had just met Alan a few hours prior to that, so this wasn't a romantic relationship. So to suggest that borderline personality disorder directly led to this murder doesn't really line up with what we know from the research literature. The mental health professional also said that somebody with borderline personality disorder would tend to brag more often than other people. This explains some of the statements that Brown made after the murder. I don't know if I really think this is accurate. Narcissistic personality disorder would be associated with bragging, and perhaps something like psychopathy, which is associated with antisocial personality disorder. But the idea that borderline personality disorder is specifically tied to bragging, I'm not really sure that rings true. I mean, anybody with that disorder could brag, but the idea that they do it more often than others, I don't know about that. The professional also noted that in Brown's life, we see a pattern of her repeatedly being taken advantage of by men. So they were suggesting that Brown was easily intimidated by men and wanted to give in to them. Now, she did have an IQ of 120 when she was tested for this trial, and this is actually fairly intelligent. This is 1 1/3 standard deviations above the mean, but the mental health professional said that she had difficulty with reality testing and she had dysfunction in many areas. So the story we see kind of emerging here is that Brown is quite intelligent, but she can't apply her intelligence because of other impairment. So this becomes kind of a tough sell, I think. If somebody's cognitively impaired and their judgment's impaired, how could they also be intelligent? Now, of course, this can make sense in some ways. I've actually seen this a few times in clinical practice, but it's hard to sell to a jury. It has to be explained pretty thoroughly so they can understand somebody can be intelligent, but that intelligence can be restrained by impairment from trauma or from substances. Now, the jury convicted Brown of first-degree murder, felony murder, and aggravated robbery. She was sentenced to life in prison, which meant that she would be eligible for parole after serving 51 years. After she was sentenced, Brown attempted to appeal her conviction unsuccessfully. During this process, we see another mental health professional weighs in about Brown's conditions. The mental health professional talked about alcohol-related neurodevelopmental disorder. He specifically indicated that ARND, as it's called, was not a personality disorder, and this disorder was not in the DSM. It would be classified as cognitive disorder not otherwise specified. Now, that would be the case in the DSM that was available at that time, DSM-4-TR. In the current DSM, this would now be other specified neurodevelopmental disorder. He also indicated that Brown was suspicious of others and her thinking was not linear. At this point, her IQ was reported as 134, so 14 points higher than before, almost a full standard deviation higher. So this really points to some type of problem in testing. This is a large amount of change from one intelligence test to another. Now, there are some things that could explain it, but still, that really kind of stands out. Now, this professional noted that her functioning was impaired despite her high IQ. So her level of functioning, again, stayed low, even though she was quite intelligent. This is the same argument that was made before at trial. Now, another mental health professional indicated that Brown's ability to understand verbal expressions was equivalent to a 10-year-old. At the time of the crime, which of course was many years before, Brown's functioning would have been even lower. Brown's history was discussed, including evidence that other professionals thought that she may have had bipolar disorder with psychotic features when they assessed her some years before. Now, this is interesting because in the Netflix special, we see that Brown was being interviewed by a mental health professional who was really giving her leading questions. It seemed like he was kind of moving her in the direction of bipolar disorder. But then we see this shot of the DSM open, and it was open to the page with borderline personality disorder. It made me wonder if those two disorders were being confused, but if that was the case, this is actually pretty common. It can be hard to differentiate bipolar from borderline. Brown had a long history of behavioral problems and criminality, including burglary and theft. The criminality specifically really wasn't fully explored in the Netflix special, although I do remember them talking somewhat about the behavioral problems. We also see this discussion of confabulation going on. There's this idea put forth that even though Brown appeared to be lying about the circumstances in the shooting, it really wasn't lying, it was confabulation. Now, confabulation is when somebody fills in the gaps in their memory to make a narrative cohesive, right? So this is suggesting that she really didn't memorize or understand the events and had to make the story complete, and that makes it look like somebody's lying. Now, this is an interesting theory, but I think you could offer just as much evidence that she was lying. She knew what she did was murder, and she was lying to get out of it. Now, what was particularly damaging here in this appeal process to Brown was the testimony revealing that she had been provided extensive mental health treatment before the crime, and that treatment evidently was not too successful. I mean, she did commit murder, and usually if somebody commits murder, we would say that the treatment was not successful, because that's probably one of the goals of treatment, right? Don't commit murder. That's probably right in there when they're going through and trying to help her. At least I hope it was. Also damaging was information about how Brown was disciplined many times in prison. She was also disciplined many times before her conviction, years before. Now, this seemed to be left out of the Netflix special as well. So as I mentioned, this appeal was unsuccessful. So this brings us to 2017. Celebrities like Kim Kardashian, LeBron James, and Rihanna take up Brown's cause, declaring that her sentence was unfair. Because, as everyone knows, celebrities are experts in just about everything, right? So it doesn't intimidate them to take on complex issues of mental health or criminality. They just jump right in and offer their opinion. Fueled by the popularity of this story, Brown's attorneys shift their efforts to the idea of approaching the governor of the state of Tennessee and asking for clemency. This is essentially Brown's only chance to get out of prison before her sentence is completed. In May 2018, the Tennessee Board of Parole decided to hold a public hearing at the prison where Brown was incarcerated, giving Brown and many witnesses a chance to argue for clemency and, of course, an opportunity for those who wanted Brown to remain incarcerated to be heard. The parole board coming into the prison is actually quite rare. The vast majority of prisoners don't get this type of opportunity. Now, Brown had many witnesses in her favor. Evidently, her behavior in prison improved significantly since that appeal that I talked about before. Interestingly, the lead detective in her case testified that there was no evidence that Brown had been trafficked since the age of 12, which of course was one of her key arguments. This was left out of the Netflix special, although the Netflix special did include a short segment where one of Alan's family members opposed clemency. The parole board was divided after hearing all of the testimony. 2 of the members said that no change should occur. 2 recommended that the sentence should be shortened from 51 years to 25 years. And 2 indicated that they thought a sentence of 15 years was fair. January 2018, the governor of Tennessee commutes Brown's sentence to 15 years, followed by 10 years of probation. Accordingly, she was released from custody on August 7, 2019. So was justice served in this case? So I'll talk about the factors pointing toward the idea that justice was served, and then talk about the factors pointing in the opposite direction, that this was really an injustice. On the side that justice was served, the victim, Johnny Allen, was committing a felony when he was murdered, right? He had picked up Brown, who was only 16. Now, one could make the argument that he did not know Brown's age, but either way, he was still committing some type of crime. Even though this has been disputed, Brown may have had a long history of being abused by men. It seems fairly clear she at least had some history of this, right? So even if we don't look at it and say, okay, it was happening since the age of 12, clearly it happened at some point for at least a limited duration. Brown was diagnosed with several mental disorders. After a while in prison, Brown did straighten up and follow the rules. She even took college classes. Even though she was guilty, she was only 16 when the crime was committed, right? So those factors all point toward the idea that it was just that Brown was released after 15 years. On the side that justice was not served, Brown pointed a .40 caliber semi-automatic pistol at the back of a sleeping man's head and shot him. She then took his property and fled the scene. Evidently, she also contemplated returning to the scene to steal more property. Even though Allen was committing a crime, Brown was in no danger when she shot him. I've seen this a few times on various websites. People think that Brown was acting in self-defense. but there's really no evidence to support that. The evidence actually strongly supports that she murdered Alan in cold blood. She could have easily left that house at any time instead of killing Alan. Brown had a long history of criminality and aggression. She received treatment for many years, as I indicated, and the treatment was not successful. The prosecutor described her as a professional criminal. Shortly after her arrest, at the transfer hearing, so this is when she tried to stay in the juvenile court system instead of transferring to the adult system, she made up this whole story about self-defense I talked about before. In this story, which we of course now know is a lie, she showed no remorse and no empathy toward the victim. So what do I think? If I take all these factors into consideration, what should have been done in this case? I think at the center of this case is the idea that if somebody has been traumatized and or they are mentally ill, they should be given a lighter sentence. If Brown's early release was just, then it would be just for thousands of other inmates as well. A significant proportion of inmates have mental illness and trauma histories that, in theory, would mitigate their responsibility for their crimes. In terms of the argument based on trauma and mental illness, these factors are already taken into consideration in the criminal justice system. Although I do think that this needs to be explored further. We do need reform in this area. Now, my thoughts on the impact of mental illness and trauma doesn't mean that I think Brown should have served 51 years. I do think an argument could be made that her sentence was excessive. If the decision were up to me, and I'm really glad that it's not, I think I would have been inclined to have Brown serve 25 years, followed by 15 years of probation. This would have given her a chance to grow up a little bit more, to establish a longer record of following the rules, and to demonstrate further how she had been rehabilitated. One of the elements that really troubles me when considering these types of cases is the idea that everybody sees the criminal, in this case Brown. She can make her case, she can call for support, she can write letters, she can attract attention from celebrities, but nobody hears the victim, in this case Johnny Allen. He never had the chance to tell his side of the story. His voice was lost. He never had the chance to be rehabilitated. He's forever frozen as the monster who picked up Brown that night in 2004. Brown had a chance at redemption, which I think is good. Allen had no chance at redemption, which of course is tragic. What we have here in the end is an individual who was a victim. She did endure horrible occurrences, and she also killed a person in cold blood. This leaves society with no easy answers. I hope that Brown makes the best of her freedom, and I hope that cases like hers do lead to reform. The last point I'll make is about the celebrities who got involved. I realize that the celebrities in this case helped quite a bit, and I wish that they would invest their effort in policy as much as they invest in individual cases. It seems like they're just reacting emotionally and not actually thinking everything through, not actually looking at the larger picture. The system is broken. We should fix the system. Correcting each individual injustice is fine and a worthy endeavor, but where is the effort to fix the root of the problems? The battle for justice only started when Brown was released, but the celebrities are not always up for the extended fight. I know whenever I talk about controversial cases, there will be a variety of opinions. Please put any opinions and thoughts in the comment section. They always generate an interesting dialogue. As always, I hope you found my analysis of this topic to be interesting. Thanks for watching.